Before we start the Punnett Square Worksheet, you should really make sure that you know all the vocabulary words. You should have a cheat sheet like this in Notability, labeled Genetics Cheat Sheet. If you look at the top left corner, you have 4 of the main words you'll be using today. Dominant means the stronger gene, so it's written in all capital letters. Recessive means the weaker gene that's symbolized by a lowercase letter. Homozygous means same, so if you look, we wrote it in all capital letters and we colored in the O's to show all the O's are the same. Heterozygous means different. It's going to be symbolized by a capital and then a lowercase letter, so that's why that's written that way. When you look on the right side, you see the word genotype, which means the genes. We can't see those, so we have to symbolize them with letters. So capital G, lowercase g would be an example of a genotype. Phenotype means physical traits, and the pH in phenotype matches the pH in physical, so it's an easy way to remember it. For example, dimples or eye color, anything that we could see. We've told you that you can add a page if you go down to the bottom of your cheat sheet right here. You can click on the next page. You can make another copy of it as many times as you want to make sure that you're able to remember all these words and that you can recreate this cheat sheet every time we take a quiz or a test. So now let's get started on the worksheet. If you look at the top, it does go over a sample problem. It reminds you that capital letters are dominant. It also gives you a couple reminders of those words that I just went over, dominant, recessive, phenotype, genotype, so you can look back at those at any point. So there's an example here. It says a green pea plant, capital G, is being crossed with a green pea plant that is capital G, lowercase g. So I'm just going to show you here, remind you that one of the parents is going to go on top of the box. It doesn't matter which one, but I usually put the first parent that they talk about on the top. Then the second parent is going to go on the side. So you just have to make sure that you copy those parents exactly. Some people, when they get to the box, for some reason, will write down different letters. So just make sure whatever the first parent is, you write down both of those letters at the top. And the second parent, you write down both of those letters on the side. Once you are done writing the parents, then you're going to fill in your box by bringing one letter down and the other letter over. So that's how they got those 2 capital G's. Then you go to the next side, or the next box, and you need to bring a letter down and a letter over. The ones on the bottom, again, you're going to bring letters down and over. You always want to make sure you write the capital letter first, just to make things a little more consistent and clear. Again, you bring this little g over so that you end up with big G, little g there. When you're finished with the box, then you want to look at each one of those boxes individually. So if I look at this box first, I can see that they're both capital. I know that that means homozygous because they're the same. And I know that it means dominant since they're both capital. And I see there are 2 boxes like that. So that's where we get this 50% homozygous dominant. Then if I look at the next box, I see that we have capital G, lowercase g. That is different since we have 1 capital, 1 lowercase. So I know we're going to call that heterozygous. And I see that I have 2 boxes like that, so that's where we get this 50% heterozygous from. Once you're done with the genotypes, then we can look at the phenotypes. And for this example, it tells you up here that capital G stands for green, lowercase g stands for white. So when I look at each of these boxes, this one will be green since it has a capital letter. This one also has 2 capital letters, so it has green genes. Then when we look at this one, it has a green gene and a white gene, both. But we know that the dominant letter is going to show up when both of them are present. So this one will be green as well. And the 4th box also has a capital letter, so it will also be green. So that's why we have 100% green plants, pea plants. Remember that each box is 25%. So for all of these other problems, if you have something that's just one box, it'll be 25. And then if you count up 25, 50, 75, 100, those are your only choices. And you can also have 0%. All right, so the next problem, the actual problem that you need to start working on, if you think you have a good idea of how to do this, you should really pause the video, try to do as much as you can yourself, and after you're done with problem 1, go ahead and look at the explanation. Problem, the actual problem that you need to start working on, if you think you have a good idea of how to do this, you should really pause the video, try to do as much as you can yourself, and after you're done with problem 1, go ahead and look at the explanation. If you, as you go, if you start getting more and more confident, then you don't have to listen to the whole explanation. You can kind of zoom ahead and see if everything matches. If it does, then you don't have to listen to me the whole time. But if it's not matching, you'd want to listen to the whole explanation and see where you went wrong. For this first one, I am going to give you a couple of tips, so you might want to stick with me before you start it. It's up to you. But one strategy is that I'm going to talk to you about is called UMP. And the U stands for underline. So we're going to go here and we're going to underline our options here. So dimples is the trait we're looking at. It doesn't give us another option. The other option would be no dimples. It just doesn't quite say that anywhere, so we can't underline it. It says dimples are a dominant trait. So since they're dominant, I'm just going to put a capital letter here. I'm just going to use B's just because it's an easy letter to use. It doesn't really matter if you prefer using another letter, as long as the capital and the lowercase look really different from each other. So capital B is going to stand for dimples. Then it says, the U was the underline, the M is marking the letters, which I did right there. And then the P stands for parents. Now I'm going to go look for the parents and figure out what their letters are. So it says 2 people who are homozygous dominant for dimples are about to have a baby. So when I look at that, I see the word homozygous. If I see homozygous, I should be thinking to myself, what does homozygous mean? When I think back to my word art, it means same. And dominant means capital letter. Okay, it means the big letter. So if I have a parent that is same big letters, then I'm going to write capital B, capital B. And since it says we have 2 of those, my other parent is also going to be capital B, capital B. So now, if you look at my UMP strategy, I did my underlining, I marked the letters dominant or recessive, and I figured out my parents. So now I'm ready to actually start my problem. I can take those letters from the first parent and from the second parent and put them on the Punnett Square. And then I'm going to fill out the box. This one's pretty easy since they're all capital B's. Every box will end up with 2 capital B's here, because when I bring my letters down and over, that's what I end up with. All right, so now I have to look at the percentages. I have capital B, capital B. That is the same, so it's homozygous, and it's capital, so we call it homozygous dominant. Every one of these boxes is like that, homozygous dominant. So when I go over to my genotypes, I can write 100% homozygous dominant, and that means that I don't have anything else. Okay, since I named them all homozygous dominant, you could put zeros for the other choices. For phenotypes, I want to know physically what would show up. So if I look back at my problem, it says dimples are dominant. Since all of them have a capital letter, 100% of the kids would have dimples, and 0% would have no dimples. All right, so now we're done with problem number 1. Again, if you feel like you can go ahead and try number 2 before you watch any of my instructions. All right, so for number 2, it says a snake that is homozygous dominant for thicker stripes is crossed with a homozygous recessive thin striped snake. So the first part of my strategy was U for underline. So I want to underline the traits that I have, which are thicker stripes and thin stripes. So I've underlined my 2 traits. Now the next one was the M for marking the letters. So thicker stripes, it says homozygous dominant was for the thicker stripes, and homozygous recessive was for thin stripe snakes. So since it gives me those clues there, I can put on a capital B for the thick and a lowercase b for the thin stripes. Alright, so now I've done my underlining and my marking. Now I can look for the parents. Homozygous dominant is the first parent. So homozygous, think to yourself, what does that mean? When we had our word art, we colored in all the O's to show that it was all the same. And when I look at dominant, I should always be thinking of that capital letter. So homozygous dominant would be capital capital. Homozygous, when I get to this side, again, we colored in these O's to show they were all the same. Recessive means small. So if it's same small, then I should see 2 little letters for this parent. So I need to take the parents that I just found for number 2 and put them on the Punnett square. So my first parent, capital capital at the top. My second parent is going to be lowercase lowercase on the side. And then when you fill this in, you always have to bring the letters straight down and straight over. You cannot, sometimes I see people go diagonally for some reason, especially when they get over here to the bottom right corner. People start to get a little crazy with where they're putting their letters. So make sure that you go to each box and you're going straight. You can always double check each box. If I look at this box, I should be able to go straight up, and I should be able to go straight to the left and be able to see exactly where I got my letters from. Alright, so the next box, I bring the capital B straight down and the lowercase b straight over. And I end up with each box looking like this, capital B, lowercase b. So think to yourself, does that look same or different? Hopefully you're thinking different since there's a capital and a lowercase. And then look over here, which word in this section means different? Heterozygous is the one that we wrote capital lowercase in the word art. So each of these boxes are capital lowercase or different from each other. The two letters are different from each other. So it's going to be 100% heterozygous. None of them are homozygous dominant. None of them are homozygous recessive. Now I need to figure out the phenotypes. So I'm going to look at the Punnett square again. I have capital B, lowercase b. So I have the genes for both thick stripes and thin stripes. So I have to think to myself, well, if I have thick stripes and thin stripe genes, which ones are actually going to show up? Think to yourself about that. The dominant gene always shows up if it's present. So the thick stripes are definitely going to show up in each one of these boxes. So it's going to be 100% thick stripes and 0% thin stripes. All right, keep in mind that there was a warning at the end of the last page to tell you that these answer choices are not in the same order as they were on the first page. So just make sure that you are thinking carefully about where you're putting your percentages, and make sure that you're paying attention to decide which of these is dominant or recessive for the phenotypes before you just put your percentages there. So for number 3, it's talking about gorillas. Albinism, it means that there's no coloring in the fur or the skin, is a recessive trait compared to darker fur. This albino gorilla over here mated with a gorilla who is heterozygous for fur color. So if we use our UMP strategy, first thing we need to do is underline the traits. So I see that there is albinism, meaning the no coloring, and I see darker fur. So now I've underlined my two options. Now I need to mark them with letters as far as being dominant or recessive. I can see here that it says that albinism is recessive, so I'm going to put the recessive letter over here. I'm just going to continue to use B's again, just so it's easy to use the same letter. And then the darker fur then must be dominant, so I'm going to use the capital letter over here. Now that I know that, I can move on to the P and find the parents. So it says this albinoed gorilla. So if this gorilla is albino, that's really all I need to know. It doesn't tell me whether it's homozygous or heterozygous. It doesn't give me those exact words. But since I know that albinism is recessive, the only way that this gorilla could have turned out albino is if they had two lowercase b's. If they had had something like this, where it's dark fur gene and albinism, then it would have turned out having dark fur. So that's actually not going to be an option. Anytime you have a recessive trait, you're going to see two recessive genes that created that trait. So now we need to look for the other parent. It says the gorilla is heterozygous for fur color. So I'm going to write capital B, lowercase b, since that's what heterozygous means. Now that I have those two parents figured out, I can work on my Punnett square. So the first parent has albinism. The second parent is heterozygous. I've got them filled out correctly here. Now when I fill out the square, I need to make sure that I'm always bringing the letters straight down and straight over. So this one, I bring this capital B over and this lowercase b straight down. The capital B is going to come over to the next box on the right as well, and that lowercase b from the top will come down. On the bottom boxes, again, I have to make sure that the letters are coming straight down from the top, so this lowercase b on the left is going to come straight down, and this lowercase b at the bottom is going to come straight over. At the top, the lowercase b will come straight down again, and this lowercase b will come straight over. Erase some of my arrows here to clean it up, but this is what your box should look like at the end. So now that we have the box filled out, we can go over to the percentages for the genotypes. I like to look at the box itself instead of focusing on the percentages over there. So I'm going to look here and see what would I call this. I see a capital and a lowercase, so I'm going to call that different. And the word for different is heterozygous. I have two boxes that are heterozygous, so I'm going to put 50%, since it's 25% for each box. 25 and 25 is 50. Then the next set of boxes I see a lowercase b, lowercase b. Those are the same as each other, so I know it's homozygous. I have two choices though, homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. Since these are lowercase letters, I'm going to call it homozygous recessive. There's another box like that as well, so these two together make up my homozygous recessive 50%, which means I have none that are homozygous dominant. Now it says dark fur and albino here, so if I remind myself the dark fur was my dominant trait and albino was my recessive trait, I see I have two boxes that have a capital letter, so there's two boxes that'll end up with the dominant trait. And then there are two boxes without a capital letter, so they're going to end up with the recessive trait, 50%. All right, now we're going to move on to the next problem. If you understand what you're doing, make sure that you are working on these problems on your own before you listen to the explanation and fill it out. If you're just filling it out along with me, it might seem like you're understanding, but you're not actually getting the practice. Okay, you need to practice on your own and then use this to check yourself. All right, horses with long tails are dominant to horses with short tails. Two heterozygous parents are crossed. So I'm going to use that UMP strategy again, UMP. I want to underline my traits. So I see long tails as an option and short tails as an option. Then I need to mark dominant and recessive. So long tails are dominant, which means I'm going to put a capital letter by long tails. If that's dominant, then short tails must be recessive. And now I can move on to finding my parents. It says two heterozygous parents are crossed. So if I see heterozygous, hetero means different. So I'm going to put one capital and one lowercase. And now it tells me that there are two of those parents. So if I have one heterozygous, now I also need the other parent to be heterozygous as well. This throws people off for some reason when they see that there are two of something. Instead of writing the same thing twice, for some reason people feel like they have to switch it up. So just be careful for that. If you see that there are two, make sure that you write the same thing on the top of the box that you do on the side. All right, now this is the trickiest box that you could get to have two heterozygous parents. It's not that hard, but when you get to the percentages, you're going to notice you've got a lot more variety here. So this capital B came straight down and the other capital B came straight over. Then when I go in the next box, this capital B will come over. So I will write that capital B, and then this lowercase b will come straight down. Over here, this capital B has to come straight down, and the lowercase b has to come straight over. So you will write capital lowercase. And then for the last box, again, lowercase b from the top will have to come down, and lowercase b from the side will have to come over. And that gives you two lowercase b's in that bottom corner. Now if we go ahead and look at the first box, I see I have two capital B's. You always think to yourself, same or different. Those are the same, so I'm going to use the word homozygous. And then if I look at my choices, I have homozygous recessive or homozygous dominant. Dominant is capital, so I only see one box like that. I'm going to write 25% homozygous dominant. Then if I look at the next box, I have a capital lowercase. Think to yourself, same or different. It's different, and I have two boxes like that that have the different genotypes. So I'm going to write 50% heterozygous. And then I'm going to get to my last box here with the lowercase. It's the same, and it's lowercase, so I'm going to write 25% homozygous recessive. Phenotypes, short tails were my recessive trait. Long tails were my dominant trait. I only have one box that would have a short tail, because remember, if you have a recessive trait, you have to have two lowercase letters, not just one. So that one box is 25% short tail. And then I would end up with three boxes, this one, and this one, all have a capital B, so they would all end up being long tails. So if I count up those boxes, I had 25, 25, and 25. So that would be 75% total. Remember, it's like counting quarters. If I had 3 quarters, I would have 75 cents. All right, problem 5. Work it out on your own. Press pause, work it out on your own, and then watch this to check yourself. Also, remember I said in the beginning, if you're really getting the hang of it, you don't have to watch the whole explanation. You can kind of zoom ahead and just kind of see the answers first, and only backtrack to the explanation if you need help. All right, number 5, a particular plant has flowers that have a sweet scent. The sweet scent is a recessive trait that most of them have, but some of the plants have flowers with the dominant trait, which has no scent. A plant that is heterozygous for this trait is crossed with a plant that is homozygous dominant for no scent. So there's a lot of information there. Again, we want to kind of pay attention to using that UMP strategy. Underline the two traits. So if I look back through this, I see sweet scent is one trait, and no scent, having no scent at all, is the other trait. Now I need to mark which one is dominant, which one is recessive. It tells me that the sweet scent is recessive, so I'm going to put a lowercase b there. The no scent is dominant. It tells me that, and also just because the other one's recessive, I could figure that out anyway. So sweet scent is recessive, having no scent is dominant. Now I'm ready to move on to finding the parents. It tells me that the plant is heterozygous, so if I think to myself about what heterozygous means, it means different, so I'm going to put that directly in the box just because I don't have a lot of room. Heterozygous means one capital, one lowercase. The other parent is homozygous dominant, so homozygous meaning same, dominant meaning capital. So 2 letters that are the same in capital. When I fill out the box by bringing the letters straight down and straight over, this is what I end up with. So now if I look at the boxes, my first box has 2 capital letters. They are the same, so it's homozygous. They are capital, so it is dominant. Since I have 2 of those, I'm going to write 50% homozygous dominant. Right here, I have a box that is capital lowercase, so that is going to be considered hetero since it's different. 2 boxes like that mean I have 50% heterozygous. I don't have any that are same little because that would look like this. Sweet smell we said was the recessive trait, so I'm going to mark that down here. And no smell we said was dominant. So if I look at the box, I have this first box, which is definitely going to have no smell because it has 2 capital letters, as well as this one. Now, the next box that I'm looking at right here has a capital letter, but it also has a lowercase letter. So it has a gene for having a sweet smell and a gene for having no smell. So you have to think to yourself, well, which one actually shows up? Which one actually wins? The capital letter or the lowercase letter? The capital letter, the dominant one, always shows up if it's there. So that's going to have no smell. And that would have no smell. So we actually end up with 100% that have no smell with the dominant trait. And we don't have any that are lowercase, so none of them would end up with that sweet smell. And now we're working on our very last problem. Pause it if you haven't worked it out yet. In tree frogs, red eyes are dominant to orange eyes. A frog who has orange eyes is crossed with a homozygous recessive frog. So I'm going to underline my traits, red eyes and orange eyes. Then I'm going to mark which one's dominant and which one's recessive. Since it says red eyes are dominant, I will put a capital letter right there. And that means I must put a lowercase letter on orange eyes. Now I'm ready to move on to the parents. A frog who has orange eyes, so since I see that clue of having orange eyes, I can tell myself the only way I could end up with this recessive trait is if I have only recessive letters. Remember, if I'd had a capital lowercase like this, I wouldn't end up with orange eyes because the red eye gene would take over. My other parent, it says, is homozygous recessive. So you have to think to yourself, what does homozygous mean? Remember in the word art, we colored in all those O's to remind you that it means same. And recessive, we wrote really small and lowercase to remind you that it means that small letter, the weaker gene. So this might throw you off. You might have done this wrong just because you felt like it couldn't be the same thing that you'd already written for the other parent. But same small means lowercase b, lowercase b. So you were given a clue about the orange eye parent, and then you were told straight out that this one was homozygous recessive. So both parents are lowercase b, lowercase b. which means when you fill out the box, it's really easy because they're all the same letter. I would not expect that on a test or quiz, but for practice, it's fine. And it can happen in real life. It does happen quite a bit. So now when we look at the genotypes, you have to think to yourself, what do we call this little b, little b? Is it the same or different? The two letters are the same, so we're going to call them homozygous. You have to decide which homozygous it is. Since they're little letters, and since all of them have little letters, we are going to put 100% homozygous recessive, which means there's nothing else available. Now when we go down to the bottom, red eyes is dominant, orange eyes was recessive. The only way to get orange eyes is if you have two little b's. Red eyes, you could get it if you have two capitals or a capital and lowercase. In this Punnett Square, though, we only have possibilities of kids that have two little b's. So we're going to have 100% orange eyes and 0% red eyes. All right, let us know if you have any questions, and I hope that you learned something.